Okay, so again, welcome to the DEI SIG meeting in ADSA. We are here to chat kind of as an open discussion about what ADSA can do to help advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in data science. You know, this is not a new issue, but it's taken on some new meaning in the last few months, I think. And we figured at ADSA that it was probably time to really kind of drill down and see what we could do as a community and what we could do as an organization to try to move the needle a little bit on this topic. So the goals for today, this is really meant to be a discussion or sort of ideas generation meeting. And what we're hoping for is that by the end of the meeting, we will have some products or programs or documents or statements or something that we can pull together as a group to create to try to make some differences in the near term and the long term in the field of data science. So the way that we're going to do this is Steve is going to, I'm Steve, for the first time, try to use breakout rooms in Zoom. I'm going to split you all out into a breakout room with just a handful of other people from the call. And then you have a couple of prompt questions there in the notes document that Michaela's just dropped in the Zoom chat again. Questions to try to answer, ideas to try to kind of generate, and then we'll come back, have kind of a report out and discussion, and then try to come up with some next steps, which then hopefully will result in ADSA pulling together additional calls or working groups or whatever that looks like. So we'll kind of see what we come up with and see where we get. Any questions about that format at this point? Super great. Okay, so if everybody's in the notes document, you can see down in the agenda area, there's this breakout room section. And what I'm hoping is that we can spend about 20 to 25 minutes in those breakout rooms chatting. The first thing you're going to want to do is identify a note taker. Please take notes in the document that's linked so that we don't lose them or have to collate them later. Go ahead and introduce yourselves to your fellow breakout room attendees. And then there are two major prompts that we want to start you with, but feel free to go off on tangents or talk about other on-topic topics as you see fit. But we want to know very generally what do we think the data science community can actually do to support and enhance diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field? And then more specifically, are there, what do I have listed here, products or programs or documents that ADSA could support, and ADSA includes all of you on this call, to move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the field of data science. So that's kind of the initial prompt. And again, feel free to take some discussion, take the discussion a few different ways if you need to. So I'm going to break you out into rooms. This is apparently random. And it looks like we're going to maybe have 3 to 4 participants per room. So I'll do this now. And
good luck.
Good luck, everyone. If we're all disconnected, I quit my job. Michaela, that's your
into the matrix.
That's your 2-week notice. All right, here we go. Great. So we're back from the breakout rooms. What I'd like to do now is to have someone from each room give a 3-ish minute overview kind of where you wound up with your discussion. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps and future meetings and discussions that we can have as a group. So who from breakout group number 1?
Do we know our numbers?
Do we know our numbers?
It's in the notes. So
yeah.
room number 1.
Oh, that's us.
Wait, yeah.
Okay, that's us. Great, there it is. Okay.
It's going to be either David or.
Yeah, I mean, first off, we had an amazing note taker. I see them all there. So I'm happy to go too if you guys want. So we thought about this as what can we do in impact data science for underrepresentation and DEI, both as educators and representations of people in academia and as researchers. And we actually didn't have enough time to, I would say, to do all of what we want to do because that's what made that fun. And, you know, we talked a little bit about developing models that are scalable to have impact, right? So one of the fundamental issues with underrepresentation is there are pockets of great work being done, and it's really sort of too unique to the person doing it. And we actually have to break out of that model if we're going to have systemic impact. So so the models I've launched in this space, and we've done a number of these, when we develop one, the first thing I think about is, can someone pick this up and put it at another university? It's my very first thought. How hard is it that am I doing right now? Can we go somewhere else with that? And I think there's several examples we came up with that are deployable. I'm happy to talk about those. I think though I'm going to run out of time. And then separately, we talked about the idea of, well, we're data scientists too. And is there something that we disciplinarily can bring to the table to move the needle on these things? And then we talked about, what does research look like in data science? It's multidisciplinary. And can we actually, for example, we had an NSF officer, can we convince the NSF to take that next step, or a funding agency to take that next step and say, we have basic research calls, we have brand new frontier idea calls, and we also have calls around underrepresentation in STEM. But if you think about it, they don't talk that much to each other. You know, the stuff that's done in the HBCU program or the HSI program is very focused on those specific things. But can we talk about a call that is fundamental research, that's multidisciplinary, that's in the front, and focused on equity and inclusion issues? So the science of equity and inclusion. And the reason why we thought about this is some disciplines feel they own certain things that's just very natural. Like this, I would say the education schools often say, we know how to do best principles of equity and inclusion in the education piece and empowering and improving underrepresentation data science. And I would say they have led on that for a long time, not data science, but science, STEM. But is there some limitation of them not leveraging data science expertise? Because I think there's a lot of data scientists that actually want to bring the power of data science to that question. And there, you know, you need to encourage and fund and incentivize bringing together these teams together to do work like that. That was probably too long. Then there's details in each of those directions. So I'll stop there.
Excellent. How about breakout room 2?
Took the notes, so I'm happy to do the summary. Yeah, okay, good. So after introducing and kind of going over some of the DEI efforts on each of the campuses that are represented in our group, we focus a lot on this idea of service that we put on especially colleagues from underrepresented groups. And I'll start by saying that BU has put together an advisory committee on DEI, and that led to us discussing what kinds of infrastructure can we, at the level of ADSA, instantiate that is persistent, right? Something that's not just a reaction to the current events, but something that is persistent and builds on what's happening right now. And so if we did do something like that, put together some kind of a DEI committee to advise ADSA at a higher level, there's some ideas that were included in Eric's how he structured things that we want to consider including. For example, making it very clear that serving on these kinds of DEI committees, and this is something that I think goes to institutions as well, make it very clear that being on that should be a light lift, that you're advising, but that implementation of any ideas really needs to fall on the leadership of that institution, not on the advisors of a DEI committee. And then also being thoughtful about the populations and communities that that committee is serving, right? There's different layers of groups, both within an institution and a broader community like ADSA. They're the really engaged people. There are people that are kind of more sort of dip into our community, check their email once in a while. And whatever outcomes, those are gonna have implications for those different groups at different levels. So getting back to this idea of being on a committee, the important thing is to give credit for service. And so we spent a little bit of time talking about that credit for service at a university or an institution is already kind of problematic before you even talk about DEI, because different institutions value faculty service in different ways. And then it also depends on what career stage you're at. So the service recognition is different if you're pre-tenure or tenure going for promotion, and that the metrics keep flipping around. And so we thought about, is DEI distinct, or is it actually an opportunity to argue that service is something that needs to be universally recognized? And Sierra brought up a really important point, which is that the current structure and the idea of this kind of service is a handicap to marginalized groups, right? So here again, we're seeing an example of where the current system is already setting up to bias against the groups that are already struggling to have a voice in our field. So not leaning on our URM colleagues, which we are doing somewhat much right now, especially, there's a lot of emotional labor that goes into these committees, and serving as the representative for DEI that needs to be taken into account. And at the end, I mean, we talked about a few other products too, but I want to wrap up really quickly by saying that Sierra had a really beautiful idea, which is, what about reframing these DEI committees as research groups? Make the products that come out of these committees research-driven, data-driven, and really make them recognized as research group with research products that can be listed that way on a CV. And that might kind of get us away from the idea of DEI being a service and instead being part of the research that happens in our community.
I just jump in maybe just
Yeah.
that was fantastic, Michaela, thank you. Just to draw a connection explicitly between what David was saying and what Michaela was saying. You know, Sierra's idea was really that the research is the sled that pulls you through tenure, right? For any sort of R1 and whatnot. And no matter what we say, that's where it's going to stay for structurally. So we think about Ibrahim Kemdi having just joined BU, for example, and structure, the impact of structure is huge in his writings. This is a way to try and leverage that structural flaw or benefit, however you want to look at it, but it is what it is currently. If we can get more of this type of work attached to the research, whether some of it is still service-like, then hopefully that will disincline people from segmenting it off and saying, well, that's of this type of thing. And so that, again, just emphasizing what David said, to the extent that NSF can pick up on some sort of idea like that and allow the service-like aspects to be hitched to the research sled in a way that pulls them all forward, I think that doubles the impact of the research.
Yep.
Great. What about group 3?
I'll be giving the report for group 3 mainly because I was the note taker. The other participants were Daniela and Will. And we came into this from the perspective of education because all of us care deeply about using education to create data science as a field that's equitable and inclusive from the start. And that means actively noting that we're looking at all of the problems in STEM, calling them out, recognizing them seriously, and trying to figure out what we need to do differently. And that means actually confronting the power structures in STEM that have led to the outcomes of lack of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And data science has real ways to bring more people in, especially through undergraduate education that has easy on-ramps. And we have institutions that have taken that very seriously as a motivation to demonstrate that data science is valuable for and inclusive of people who have not felt strongly represented in STEM before. But we're all confronting the fact that equity and inclusion and diversity drops off a cliff at even the sophomore, junior level. And we're dealing with that in like institutional frameworks where no longer are the courses that we create to be inclusive entirely under our control. And so that is the place where you end up really having to have tough conversations about existing practices and power structures, whether it is in a junior level machine learning class that is still using fully racist examples without even thinking about it, or whether it's in practices of which students are recruited to research groups, who gets into graduate school, how hiring is done at the faculty level. And so we felt that it was really essential to be frank and clear about those challenges and use the words that may make some of our colleagues uncomfortable, knowing that we're working inside a structure of institutional racism that we're all deeply committed to changing. So some of the ways that we brainstorm to have those more challenging conversations is to go back to the literature of the few cases in STEM where change has been achieved and pull out models and examples from that. And so we had some examples from astronomy, from studies from the American Institute of Physics, and some of those are in the notes document. Also from the educational literature, where it's been demonstrated that the pipeline model is a false framing of the problem. So we need to actually stay up to speed with what the current framing is. And here, I'm not the expert, but there are folks in our group who can provide more references here. And one of the things that really comes out is finding the gatekeepers and getting them to change the practice, because modeling the behavior is apparently an incredibly powerful mode of transition. And if you don't have someone modeling the behavior, if everyone's just talking, also it can't happen. So we thought of some things that ADSA could do there, and they start with actively speaking in the language that calls out the problem in sharp terms and gives references to the evidence-based literature on DEI and STEM, and point to other fields that have shown that they've been able to start making incremental progress. And then to state expectations and share models about things like code of conduct, hiring practice. And then ultimately it comes down to working with the funding agencies too, and lobbying them to be agents for change. So Danielle and Will, is there things you would add to that?
I think the only thing that I would add is to reinforce this notion that I don't think data science is unique in a lot of ways, and that the problems that data science grapples with reflects a lot of the problems that many STEM fields, especially like computer science and physics, grapple with. And that, I think, to some extent hampers it, because it inherits a lot of these things from these fields because they're so dominant, but it's also an opportunity to connect to initiatives and research and knowledge in those individual disciplines and the people in those departments who do that kind of work, to sort of, work together in that context.
That was a great summary. No, I don't have anything to add.
Great. How about the last group? And we're going to probably run a few minutes over. So if you have to drop off, that's cool. We'll be sending out follow-up afterwards. But yeah, if the last group could do it now.
Group 4, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey there. I'm going to represent Group 4. Also in the group were Andrew, Alicia, and Claudia. So we spent a lot of time talking about some of the efforts that are underway at our respective institutions and networks to address some of these issues from an education, sort of top to bottom throughout the university structure, education up through faculty recruiting. So some of the things, sorry that I took notes because I was getting a little seasick with the document going up and down. So I took notes separately. I'll paste them in afterwards. There was a lot of discussion in our group around partnerships with HBCUs, right? So so MSU, University of Delaware, Michigan State University, and University of Virginia all have partnerships at various levels with HBCUs, sometimes explicitly through academic programs. So there was an example given at MSU about MSU creating a 3-2 program with a agnostic STEM in bachelor's, and then the 2 at the end there is a master's in data science from MSU to try to pull students into the pipeline that way. And there was some discussion also about MSU reaching out to Latinx partners as well. A really interesting idea that was brought up was this idea of specifically for underserved and under-resourced communities, having coursework count towards essentially certificates. So after you go through like the first year of your studies, having that essentially give you a certificate in something, so you can start to do your education in more bite-sized chunks. So, because there's a lot of, especially for socioeconomically disadvantaged folks, there's a lot of issues related to being able to afford the education experience in order to be part of it, simultaneously working while trying to make this happen, and sort of giving that credentialing as you're making your way through the program might be a good way to sort of let people build off what they've done before without feeling like they did something and they're just not going to finish and so they wasted their time, kind of thing. There was a lot of discussion about UVA's efforts to recruit faculty and recruit faculty of color and Black faculty. Sort of novel to me that I've heard of so far. I haven't heard of this anywhere else. There has a position open called a data activist in residence at UVA right now. Claudia can speak more to that. And also the data science program at UVA is working with, and so right now they have gender parity. Apparently there was a bit of a wake-up call a few years back when there was a largely male-dominated incoming class, and so there was a lot of sort of one-on-one outreach going on, and also trying to pull up their U.S. population in their incoming class, right? We then talked a fair bit about something that came up at the leadership conference last year. It was one of the big topics of conversation at the leadership conference we had last year, which was ethics and policy impacts of data science, right? So there's a variety of ways that this is sort of entering various parts of the curricula at the places that we represent. At the University of Delaware, I teach a machine learning for public policy class. There's ethics that are going through the MSU and UVA data science curricula. So one of the things we discussed was using this kind of format as a way to bridge the sort of STEM, non-STEM divide, right? So as Daniela pointed out, there's a lot of issues, especially in the sort of very heavy STEM fields, with lack of representation and lack of inclusion. There's still a big problem in other fields as well, but it's less so. And topics like this, so for example, the lived experience of people of color and Black people are topics of study in things like sociology and policy and those kinds of things. So being able to pull those people together with sort of folks who are more STEM focused can start to maybe bridge some of that divide. And as it was pointed out in the leadership conference, in general, there's sort of it's the sort of teaching of ethics and data science is the one thing that we maybe don't totally all agree on yet of how it should happen, and there's not a lot of sort of really good models out there. So that might be something for future discussion. There was an interesting idea that came up towards the end about potentially co-designing a curriculum with HBCU partner. Not specifically not dictating curricula to anybody, but sort of providing some essentially consulting with under-resourced universities from a university that has more resources to help sort of create a program or create some of the concepts behind a program for places that don't have the ability to hire 20 faculty at a time, for example, and start up a whole data science initiative. And so specifically what can ADSA do? We talked about a couple of different things. At the University of Delaware, we have a couple of projects where we have a federal agency who came in and said, this is a project that we'd like to get going. Can you partner up with your sort of local HBCUs? There's a lot of discussion about HBCU partnership. Can University of Delaware partner up with local HBCUs to sort of address this and supervise HBCU students? Howard University, for example, was our main partner to sort of tackle this problem. So those kinds of like three-way partnerships between federal agencies, HBCUs, and more resourced larger universities. And so facilitating that partnership possibly. And then especially on building relationships, right? So it was pointed out that I think it was the last leadership conference was the first time there was a sort of a broader representation of universities and not just sort of the big three kind of resource kind of thing. And that was apparently brought a lot of good perspective. And so more of that, more relationship building on that front.
Greg, I just want to jump in for a second to mention that since you brought up partnerships with MSIs and big research universities and federal agencies, if any of you missed it, we did have the MSRDC give a SIG call. They did a presentation about their research consortium, and they specifically partner exactly those three. So they have a lot of funding, and it's a non-competitive funding model. So if you're interested in partnering with an HBCU or other minority serving institutions, that's a great resource. And just check out the call was recorded, so it's accessible through the website.
Great, and I'm going to drop a link to the MSRDC in the chat window too. They're a cool group of people to get in touch with. Okay, so we have just had a huge number of ideas come flowing through, and I think probably the best thing for us to do at this point is for the ADSA folks to try to distill what we're hearing from this meeting and follow up with everyone here and everyone else in the community to try to come up with what the next steps might look like. And I think that's probably the best way forward. Otherwise, I'll just be sort of blabbing for the next 10 minutes. Does anybody have any thoughts about what that process might look like, or other questions or comments they'd like to throw into the mix here before we give you the rest of your day?
This is Chetan. I just have a quick thought, not about the process, but one more idea to give you all. So I'm the one who was from NSF. So right now I'm at the National Science Foundation. And I don't know exactly how, but what I'll mention is we have a new director at the NSF. And he recently gave a short interview in the Science magazine. I don't have it now to post it, but I think if you search, you'll find it. And one of the things that he talked about, and I think it's a passion of his, that's what he did when he was at Arizona State, is this notion of use-inspired research. So his name is Punch, he goes by Punch. So Punch has been talking a lot about use-inspired research, and this may be an opportunity for you all to think about how this notion of diversity can be actually a use-inspired concept, because use-inspired is nothing more than saying, what's the real stuff going on out there? What are the real problems and how do we address them? Of course, we should do foundational research, and NSF will continue to fund that, but it's this new situation we find ourselves in where there are so many complex problems that they really need solving, and they require this kind of approach. And so maybe if you cast your whatever documents you put together, not only in this way, but maybe this is one way to think about this problem, is to say, well, it's a problem in society. It's what we've been recognizing. So it's, in that sense, a use-inspired concept. I just wanted to mention.
Great, thank you. Any other thoughts, questions, or comments?
I don't know exactly how to say this, but the representation on this call isn't representative of the data science community that we'd like to see. So we should at least acknowledge that. And I'm sure there are perspectives that we're not getting because we don't have the lived experience represented here. So that seems like a next step for all of us.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just jumping on that. Actually, where I spent the most time in my introduction was explaining that the reason why I do mathematics growing up in the Central Valley, you know, with my mom who's Hispanic, was finally going to a community very early on in my education career that was really well represented. And it's really the only reason why I'm sitting in this position today. And they are lifelong mentors of I still check in with them from an experience I had 21 years ago on a safe place I can ask questions to around, is this a good career choice for that? That's how high an impact it is to have formidable representative experiences. That's why I'm doing this. Like, I got here because I've told those mentors that too. So to sort of flip that with Karen too. Catherine, I think that, you know, the trouble is the other thing that was represented in this call, which is like, then it weighs heavily on the underrepresented faculty to lead these as well. And there's this critically unsolved balance between those things, which I think there was really good solutions proposed in this call today on balancing those two issues. I'm on every committee in the STEM in my school that has to do with picking provosts and deans and all that stuff. And I wouldn't mind getting a break from that, right? So, but yeah, I definitely see both things here. And yep.
Yeah, quickly again, related to that. So I agree. I mean, the diversity here isn't what you want it to be. And I'm about to send an email to Michaela about this. Just FYI to all of you, one person that might join this community is Talitha Washington. So Talitha was a colleague of mine here at NSF. She's in the same program that I'm at. Associate professor at Harvard University, has just been announced as the first director of a data science initiative in the Atlanta University Center Consortium, which includes Spelman, Morehouse, and a couple of other universities. So she's all excited, and we are excited for her. And I actually told her about this group, and you might actually want to invite her to the next meeting because you have a session on diversity. So I think she's just great. So having people like that would be good.
Thank you so much, Triton. That they are on our list to reach out to, that consortium. So having a direct invite would be great.
Yeah, she
Not
just
a
got
cold
on
call. Perfect,
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, I know Talitha, and I know what's his name, Todd Green, who's the AUCC director. So happy to make an introduction if that's so desirable.
Great, thank you. So I think it might be time to move along. So what you'll hear from me probably in the next, well, definitely next week, is a wrap up or distillation of what we've talked about today and some sense of what we think the next steps could be. And hopefully we'll see you all in some version of future meetings and discussions and working groups that we pull together out of this meeting. So thanks everyone for coming today, and we look forward to doing more work and moving the needle.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for organizing.
Yes,
Thank you,
thanks
everyone.
very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.